User.com virtual pubcast. I'm your host, Ken Ekman, and I'm joined today by Bill Leon
Howdy.
and Zach Jeremiah.
Voice only. I'm a ghost.
Yes, Zach unfortunately is having some bandwidth problems, so if we have some audio issues on his end, I do want to apologize in advance. That said, we're glad to have him here, and we have quite a bit to talk about. This is sort of a clearinghouse episode. Because there are...
I think we've been having a lot of these lately, just to point that out.
Well, yeah, how it works usually is there will be a weekend where there isn't any really prominent releases per se, if not prominent, releases that aren't particularly compelling for people to just go out in droves and see. I mean, Spectre was last week, and so was the Peanuts movie, and so everyone's going to see those. But no one's going to see that football movie with Aaron Eckhart.
My All-American.
Yeah, My All-American. I don't even fucking remember the name of that movie.
Which, apparently, it's called My All-American, but it's very specific to Texas from what I'm hearing about it.
I hear it's a vaguely faith-based football movie, and I've already had the ending spoiled for me by someone who spoiled it for me specifically to tell me not to see it.
Right.
He says, this is the... Yeah, well, he says, this is the kind of movie you will go to looking for an inspirational sports drama, and you'll come out depressed because it's about dying of cancer. So I'm just throwing that spoiler out on Front Street.
Is this like...
Inspirationally.
Is this like 50-50? Like, people were like, oh, quirky Seth Rogen movie. And
You see, 50-50 didn't end with anyone dying of cancer.
Okay, I have to preface, I haven't seen 50-50.
Yeah, well, it's a few years old, so I don't feel too bad spoiling that.
Right,
and it's not a spoiler, honestly, because the movie itself is worth the ride, regardless of what you know about it.
It's also sort of written by the survivor. The movie doesn't get written.
Yeah.
Biographical movie. He doesn't survive, so it's okay.
Yeah, that's very true as well. So, with that said, we have some things to talk about. I do have one feature film that I saw in theaters, and I will touch on that first, and then we'll get into some television, a couple of movies, and just sort of a catch-all. And for those looking for prominent movies, of course, next week we've got The Hunger Games, and, I will be seeing it just because I've seen all the other movies. We'll see what happens.
Time to, close that series out.
Yeah, close that loop, so to speak.
Yeah.
Joseph Gordon-Levitt really should be in that movie.
In The Hunger Games?
Well, closing the looper.
Well, yeah, but I'm thinking I love him as an actor, and I'm not opposed to him being having a role in a Hunger Games.
Well,
I'm just thinking
Frankly, you guys know my opinion on Jennifer Lawrence. Wait. Her ability to carry a film as a lead actress.
Well, I was going to say,
not even her with a dude. I'm suggesting replacing her with anyone who breathes.
But we've had this conversation so many times. But isn't Katniss kind of an exception? Because I always thought she did really, really well in those movies.
She is okay. You know what? I will say of the movies she's in, she's passable enough because the script doesn't demand her to do too much other than look morose or do actiony stuff. Physically, she does the part of being the action hero. I put her in a position where I would put actors like, say, and I know Zach's going to vehemently disagree with me, Keanu Reeves, in that her ability to emote always feels incredibly artificial and cardboard. And yet, she paradoxically still keeps getting movie roles.
One of the finest actresses working today. That's why she's getting paid like mad on top of it.
Yeah, finest working actresses who can't act. I will never... Please... I would love to have a dissertation.
This is why Jennifer Lawrence is great. Jennifer Lawrence is Jennifer Lawrence. If you see Jennifer Lawrence anywhere, you're getting the genuine article. So that when she's trying to act, trying to access the character essentially as organically as possible. She's not coming into the character from a back door. She's not method acting. And I'll give you this. I will give you this piece. If you want to say every Jennifer Lawrence performance is some sort of version of Jennifer Lawrence, I'll give you that. That's the only criticism I'll hear, though. And what is so great about her is she is a unique individual. She makes really different choices when she is acting, particularly when she's going to an emotional place. And the fact that those choices don't look like every other Tom, Dick, and Harry Naomi Watts out there is what's special about her. That's what's realistic. The randomness. She's fucking great.
Okay. She's great.
From her humble
beginnings.
Her humble beginnings on the Bill Engvall show.
Oh God!
Let me just point that out.
That, so I can't speak to that.
I think I watched the pilot of it, and that was like when that blue collar shit was still tolerable, which was a long fucking time ago.
That was never a go for me, but
really never.
With the possible exception of Ron White. Ron White, I can take.
I've always Bill Engvall's okay. Like he's not. Well,
when I was very little,
I take it all back.
Very little, I do remember watching the Jeff Foxworthy show, but I don't remember it being particularly compelling.
Well, that's like because I was kind of mildly into that shit when it was starting to get big. So I listened to Jeff Foxworthy's albums, and then I went and like when On Demand first came out, his show was on there, and I watched it, and I was like, he's just reciting his stand-up, like, verbatim. And that's all that show was. And apparently it has a dark, fucked-up ending, the Jeff Foxworthy show.
Well, the thing about it is, it's not that it's a fucked-up ending, it's that it was meant to be a end-of-season cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Because the last episode famously ends with a tornado destroying their family home, and they're like, so what's going to happen to us? And
dun,
the answer is nothing, because you're canceled.
Haley Joel Osment's got bigger fish to fry.
So, I won't wax poetic against Jennifer Lawrence until I see Hunger Games and, am reminded once again as to why I'm not a fan of her. In the meantime, so we'll save that for next week. In the meantime, the 30.
Because you are a fan of.
I am a fan of Antonio Banderas. I've always been a fan of him as a performer. What I appreciate about Antonio Banderas as an actor is the fact that he still has a very high degree of theatricality to his performance, and it's a true uniqueness that he embodies, that he's able to carry with him. He will make you believe dialogue, no matter how cliched, no matter how chintzy. He will make you fucking believe it because he believes it, regardless of whether you do. That's the thing that I like about him.
I kind of want to see Evita just because he's in it.
About him, what I like about Jennifer Lawrence. Sorry.
Say that again, Zach.
So it sounds like you like him for exactly the reasons I like Jennifer Lawrence.
Oh, you just explained to us that you like Jennifer Lawrence because she's like random with the way she says things.
Yeah, she's genuine. Genuine.
Okay.
Genuine and randomness is a genuine trait.
I'm not gonna buy into.
It's a real human trait.
Okay.
If you were exactly like all the other Stepford wives, you're not genuine. Not
right. And I okay. You know what, Zach? I'm going to go ahead and give you that. Jennifer Lawrence certainly isn't like all the other actresses out there. What she also isn't is convincing. So that's that's something that makes her different from Antonio Banderas, I can certainly say.
Right. This is convincing and all that.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and save that conversation for next week.
Let's talk about the 33.
Yeah, when there's actually something with her in it to discuss.
Sure.
I'm sorry about pulling that out. So, the 33 is a survival drama, which is directed by Patricia Riggin, who, despite her name, is actually a Mexican filmmaker. The movie is about the 2010 Chilean mining disaster, which, if you followed the news back then, basically, the long and short of it was there's a mine called the San Jose mine in Chile that a huge piece of the mountain, a huge solid rock, detached from the wall of the inside of the mine and smashed down, cutting off 33 miners from the rest of the world. They had no way to escape. The owners of the mine shat the bed on a bunch of survival ladders that were supposed to be built in different shafts. They never completed them. They had a limited supply of food, which consisted of a few cans of tuna, a couple boxes of cookies, and some water. And this was meant to be survival equipment, by the way. And these 33 miners managed to survive something like 69 days underground while people drilled down to get to them.
Cookies,
now,
right?
What's that?
They survived off of cookies, right?
For a while. What actually happened, before getting into the movie itself, I'll just give you the basics on it. What happened was after a period of time during the disaster, they actually did drill a small shaft down to the miners, and they used a tube to distribute some supplies to them. And so there was a period in time in which the miners were able to actually communicate with the outside world via like a camera, and they got like changes of clothes and basic food supplies and a few items to get them past. I'm trying to find the exact time frame, how many days before that occurred. Let's see. It looks like, okay, yeah, 14 days into the rescue, one of the probes reached the miners and found no signs of life. And then it took 17 days for them to actually be found. So for 17 days, and apparently for the last few days of it, they had no food or water to go on. So it was we're talking down to the wire. And they were trapped hundreds of feet down. We're talking just like, it says here, 2,300 feet underground. Now, the movie is a dramatic representation of these events that more or less sticks to the basic truths behind the story. Of course, we'll never know what actually went on inside of that mine shaft for those first 17 or so days, other than what's told to us by the miners. Certainly, we can speculate, and the movie certainly does take that. The movie stars
wait. Yeah. What do you mean? What do you mean? Take that? Like, is this based on accounts of the miners, or how much factual shit has gone into this that you know of?
Well, it's ostensibly based on the book by Hector Tobar called Deep Down Dark. And Hector Tobar was a journalist who basically he chronicled some their story, and with that, so they did describe accounts of it, but it's one of those things where you've got 33 people trapped underground in a mine, cut off from the outside world. So we can we have what they tell us, but there's only so much you can extrapolate from those stories.
What you're saying is a lot of gay orgies. That's probably what was going on.
Okay, I've heard that joke said before, and I'm not going to say that did or didn't happen, but I will say, Zach, ba-dum-ba, you got it.
Especially if Antonio Banderas is involved.
Well,
that's
It's fabulous.
You know what? That's whatever. We're not just talking Antonio Banderas, mind you, because also down in the mine is Lou Diamond Phillips as the mine foreman, and also Mario Casas. Let's see, who else? Juan Pablo Raba. Don't know who that is, and a bunch of other actors who are, not as well known. But
How the lesser known actors? Do they get a lot of screen time? Do they get a lot of dialogue?
that's the chief issue in this movie is really, other than Antonio Banderas, none of the minors get much character development beyond basic, basic description of like the most stereotypical trait of them. Like there's this one character who might be he might have the most fascinating story of all of them because before being stuck in the mine, there's this one character, this one miner who has a wife and also a girl on the side, and his mistress lives literally like right across the street from him, and his mistress and his wife know everything about each other, and they're always jockeying for attention with each other. So there's this wonderful scene early in the movie where you see the wife is walking over to this house. She knocks on the door to deliver lunch for her husband while her husband goes to work. She's delivering it to the house of the mistress, and the mistress is like, why are you giving him lunch? And says, because I'm his wife. Which I thought was an interesting. You could have expanded on that as a character. You've got this just horrible human being who's banging a girl on the side openly right in front of his fucking wife, and his wife doesn't like it, but she also isn't doing much to stop it because Chile is Zach, you would say it's mostly a Catholic country, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and old school Catholic, so divorce is kind of looked down upon,
right?
Almost as much as adultery.
This is how polygamy becomes a thing. In life, in general. This is how that shit, rises from the ether of life.
That character gets the most stuff to do besides Antonio because there is, even while trapped in the mine, there's like the wife and the mistress are both jockeying for attention in the media because the mistress is being denied access to see her husband via camera while they're digging, and
right.
The husband actually passes a message on to make them allow her in, and the wife leaves him during this process. Mm-hmm. So a lot of wonderful little Jerry Springer-esque moments that could have added to that.
This feels like it could be its own movie. Just this,
it really could.
Yeah, the story of this fucking love triangle.
And then there's another story that's in another character who's it's the definition of a stereotypical character. It's the old veteran miner who is literally a week away from retirement.
Oh no, are you serious?
Yeah, which, to be fair, there was a character like that there, but the way they treat it is nothing short of...
person?
What's that?
You said a character like that there. You're talking about
there was a
real
person.
life.
One of the miners there was near retirement, but
right.
The way it's treated is very stereotypical of that kind of character.
Does he look like Santa Claus?
Yeah, he looks like a Chilean Santa Claus.
Oh man.
Which is kind of funny. I actually, yeah, you are. I don't know if you've seen part of it.
I figured the oldest fucker in the room has to be the one close to retirement, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the last two actors who have any character at all, Lou Diamond Phillips plays Luis Don Lucho Urzua, I think it's pronounced. He was the shift foreman, and the character moments he gets come from the fact that he's kind of a weak foreman in that he kind of allowed the mine management to become lax and not really, even though it's his job to oversee the safety of the miners, he feels he hasn't lobbied hard enough on their behalf. But those moments are all very short-lived, though. The character who gets the most is, of course, Antonio Banderas, who plays Super Mario Sepulveda, who is...
Is his nickname Super Mario?
Yes, they call him Super Mario.
Oh, God, okay.
Well, in real life...
Yeah.
Yeah, in real life, the character he's portraying was a very larger than life figure. He became famous on Chilean television, for instance, because he was the de facto leader of the 33 miners. He's the one who oversaw rationing of the food. He kept them alive, and he kept their spirits up. And then, what's that?
Swing your arms from side to side. Come on, do the Mario.
That's Captain Lou Albano, but
I know that.
I know where you're going. Yeah, do the Mario.
Yeah, totally.
So Super Mario though also he kind of earned his name though because beyond that he also was the first of the miners to show his face on television when they sent a small camera down for the miners to communicate with like family and such, and he kind of became the public face of the disaster.
So it makes sense for Antonio Banderas to be cast in that role.
Exactly, because you're looking for a person. He didn't earn the name Super Mario for no reason. He's a very larger-than-life, eccentric character, and Antonio plays him that way. And some of the dialogue they give him feels like something that would have been written for a telenovela because it's so incredibly just. You know, I've mentioned this one many times because it's my favorite line from the trailer, and it's, of course, a wonderful line in the movie.
Well, wait. I haven't seen any trailers for this. Do they speak Spanish with subtitles, or do they speak English?
Oh, no. There are a couple brief moments where people speak Spanish, but everyone speaks English.
Okay, whatever.
Yeah, which is kind of baffling to me because this movie... First of all, this movie's not doing too well in the U.S., but where it is doing well, Spanish-speaking countries. So they could have tailored Chile. It's I think it's one, if not the number one, it's at least in the top 2 grossing movies in Chile.
The U.S. has a huge Spanish-speaking population, so
that's true, and you can make a Spanish movie
this movie
well in the U.S.
This movie did come in at number 5 this weekend, so.
It's doing okay, but I would argue if you...
Yeah, I mean, I think it's doing...
Okay, let me give an example of something. There was a movie that came out, I don't know if it was last year or was it... Zach, do you remember Instructions Not Included?
Oh my god, I remember that.
It was early last year, maybe.
Yeah, early last year, maybe late 2013. That movie was a mostly Spanish language movie released in the U.S.
Yes.
And it did pretty well. It first of all, it had a budget of $5 million, and I'm actually on Box Office Mojo right now. In the United States, it brought in $44 million. So a Spanish-speaking, a Spanish language movie can be successful.
Well, you know what though? You know what's kind of ironic about that is the guy that wrote and stars in the movie. He plays the gardener or whatever in Jack and Jill.
Mm-hmm.
The guy that makes all the racist Mexican jokes.
Oh, well.
And he's also in Rob Schneider's failed sitcom Rob.
Oh yeah.
So what I'm saying is that, and I know you reviewed. Instructions Not Included.
It kind of did have the feeling of like a family-oriented Adam Sandler-ish kind of vehicle, I will say, because it certainly pulls heartstrings but doesn't particularly earn it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think it was a terrible movie, but it's a bit all over the place.
Hopefully, and this is me looking on the brightest of sides, but hopefully, this guy, he wrote and starred in this movie, and it did well. It's clearly because of the I think that he had the opportunity, and flip sides. Hopefully, you can go up from here.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well,
I don't want to affiliate this guy with the Adam Sandler collective.
I will say this, Bill. There was enough creativity in Instructions Not Included that I can legitimately see him doing another commercial film that ups the ante and is a little bit more cohesive.
Yeah.
So yeah,
my whole point is that when you come out of that collective, that Adam Sandler, Happy Madison, fucking, like when that's the first time I see you, that's not good.
Yeah, you can easily get trapped in that. But
Yeah.
I do want to mention, though, so Antonio Banderas gets the line, and it's in every trailer, and the way he says it is, I don't care how cliched the line is, he has so much passion in the way he says it. When they see this giant rock that has just trapped their exit, someone looks at it and says, that's a very big rock. And then Antonio says, that's not a rock. That is the heart of the mountain. She finally broke.
What?
Oh, it's that is a line that's like right out of friggin' classical literature. It is so corny, but he says it with passion. And that's what I like about it. He was able to make that line work for me. I almost got up and clapped when he said that. If it wasn't such a sad moment in the movie, god damn. There is a screenwriter somewhere out there who is incredibly proud of themselves for that line. So with that said, a few things I like about the movie. I think it's fairly well directed. I think it has decent special effects considering its lower budget. The performances are pretty solid if the characters aren't particularly well fleshed out. And the big thing that I liked is I think the movie really does it immerses you within the culture of this Atacama mining group, and you really do feel, just within the few short minutes prior to the disaster occurring, you really feel like you get an idea for how these people go about their everyday lives, living and working in one of the driest regions of the world.
Right.
And I really did enjoy that. Now, I mentioned the flaw of the way the performances are there, and it certainly does appeal to. I mentioned telenovela. It does appeal to melodrama at a lot of points. Another issue I have is some of the casting, in particular of some of the higher-ranking figures, really baffles me. What Gabriel Byrne is doing playing a Chilean. I mean,
excuse me?
Yeah, Gabriel Byrne, an Irish actor, is playing a Chilean. And I don't blame him. He's miscast, and his accent just goes in and out. You can hear his Irish brogue on numerous occasions.
Gabriel Byrne.
Gabriel Byrne. That Gabriel Byrne. Miller's Crossing, The Usual Suspects, Stigmata, End of Days.
Where does he play the devil? Oh, End of Days. I was going to say the devil. Fucking Gabriel Byrne, the devil.
Yeah, in this movie he plays the engineer who kind of put together the whole operation of getting to the miners. And he does what he can.
In fact,
I just don't think
he did a series on HBO not too long ago where he was like a therapist, and that was like
treatment.
Yeah,
it's been a while, but yeah.
People like that show. That was like critically acclaimed and stuff. Like, does he put on brown face?
They don't brown him up, but that said, Chile does have. There are a lot of people in Chile who are white Spaniard kind of descendants, so they don't have as much.
Well, there's a lot of.
What's
that?
Zach?
European immigration too. Chile and Argentina. There's a lot of European immigration there. Chile and Argentina both have high populations of Italians, like fourth, fifth generation Italians. A lot of Germans, thanks to the end of World War II.
Yeah.
A lot of Nazis ran to South America.
That's very true.
So yeah, no. Actually, when I was in Peru, living in Peru, they thought I was Chilean because I spoke with an accent and I was white. I did speak Spanish, and everybody knows, Americans can't speak other languages.
Right. Yeah, so Gabriel Byrne, kind of maybe it could have worked if his accent, if he could have gotten that straight. But yeah, he certainly didn't. And actually, I'm looking up the actual historical figure right now.
Yeah, he might have actually been a descendant. There's also a lot of Irish blood in South America. I would say the president. The president's played by like the warden from Shawshank, right?
Yeah, Bob Gunton.
That's a little more iffy in my book.
I'm pulling that up right now because President Sebastian Piñera was Piñera, I think. Yeah, Piñera. That's an N. So this was the president of Chile. I'm going to pull it up on my screen share. This was the actual president of Chile at the time. All right. So you see that? And now I will show you Bob Gunton, who is one of those actors that you may not recognize by name, but you see his face and you've seen him in so much. Here is Bob Gunton. Do you recognize this face?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, just saying that he was the warden in Shawshank was enough for me.
Yes. Well, either way, I would say Bob Gunton, you might be able to... I honestly wouldn't be surprised if maybe he has some Hispanic blood in him to an extent, but certainly not... I mean, he doesn't really resemble that person. Gabriel Byrne, on the other hand, is a more starkly different in appearance. So here is the Gabriel Byrne that we all know and we all love. Here is the Gabriel Byrne that, so yeah, that's him. And here is the person that he plays, Andre Segaret. I can't pronounce that name.
That doesn't sound like an Irish.
It does not. And here's what he looks like. Does this look like Gabriel Byrne at all?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, not by a long shot. So I'm not going to accuse the movie of whitewashing because most of the cast are Hispanic actors. And to an extent, if you're going to get a bigger movie funded, you do have. I mean, I would say actually the most noticeable casting choice that bothered me was Juliette Binoche, who plays the wife of one of the Chilean miners. She's French, and you can hear her French accent in every attempt she does to speak with, a Chilean accent. I mean, I can't pretend to be an expert on the Chilean dialect, but I will say it certainly doesn't sound French. And she's a good actress, but it's just one of those things. There's some, what's that?
Was there not a Hispanic? There's a great Chilean actress who played in Gloria. Oh, what's her name? She doesn't get enough work.
Mm-hmm.
She almost got a Best Actress now a few years ago.
So here's what I think. I think that studio interference pushed them into shooting the film in English and shooting the film with some fairly, modestly recognizable faces. That's why they got Gabriel Byrne and Bob Gunton and stuff like that. And, and even Antonio to an extent. Although Antonio is fully convincing. I mean, he's the definition of Hispanic actor. So, granted, he's certainly not Chilean, but he can manage it. On the other hand, I think if they had shot this film in Spanish and found a larger percentage of actual Central American actors for the cast, I think it could have been a better film overall because there would have been more authenticity to it. And I think it would probably have actually helped the box office figures in the U.S. amongst Spanish-speaking people, because the one problem you have is there's a lot of first-generation, second-generation Americans who do not speak very much English. And those people go to movies just as much as anyone.
Uh-huh.
And those people need movies for that. That's why, paradoxically, you have movies like Instructions Not Included that make a ton of money given their budget, even though it was not at all tailored for American audiences.
Uh-huh.
I can't say that it was a great movie, but it certainly was commercial. And this could have...
You know what the big hit this year was?
Well, aside from the Spanish speaking and you know that aspect of it, how does this stack up to Rosewater?
To Rosewater?
As far as portraying a real event.
Oh, okay. It's a weird comparison.
Is it, though? Is it?
Yeah, I mean, they're two completely different movies. I mean, as far as tackling something that
I'm
actually...
saying portraying realism, or just from the perspective of, like, telling a personal story.
I would say Rosewater is more successful in that respect. I mean, it's a much smaller film. It only focuses on really one person's experiences, and to the extent that it is accurate, we really have to rely on just his account, because certainly the Iranian government isn't saying anything.
That's why I added the caveat of saying a personal story, because of the fact that the film is made by Jon Stewart, who feels a personal involvement to those events.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if you want to say, compare them movie to movie, Rosewater's a much better film.
Right.
It has its flaws, but it's overall, I would say, a much better film. And considering it was a first-time filmmaker, it's considerably better, because Patricia Riggan's done a good number of films, and I think this is her first English-language film, or if not one of them. You know what? I would say watch this movie if you really are interested in seeing more stuff on the Chilean mine disaster, if that really caught your interest.
Right.
Otherwise, or if you're a huge fan of Antonio Banderas, otherwise, let it lie.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Zach. I think you were starting to say something, but you cut off.
I was just saying, as far Spanish language folks don't have a lot to use from. Wide release that made the top 10 like last month.
What movie? I'm sorry.
Un pollo con muchos huevos.
Oh, the animated film.
Lots of eggs?
Translates to
a chicken with lots of eggs.
Or colloquially, a chicken with big balls.
You're right. You're right.
Which is what it's going for, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, isn't it about, like, cockfighting, basically?
I don't think so.
I'm pretty sure the story in that movie has something to do with, like, cockfighting.
I don't know. I stay as far away from it. Did you see the trailer? Holy.
Yes, it looked horrific. I'm looking it up right now just because I need to prove to myself that I'm not going insane.
Okay, so
horrifically sure.
Okay. Un gallo con muchos huevos, Zach.
When it comes to animation from south of the border, as in current animation from south of the border, I know about the Top Cat movies, which the fact that there's multiple Top Cat movies is weird to me. Apparently the Hanna-Barbera cartoon Top Cat is like big with Latin America. Mm-hmm. So they made a 2D flash animation Top Cat movie in like 2011, or I want to say 2011, and then it's got an English dub. I've tried to watch it, and I don't think it's anything like terrible, but I was just sort of like, why? Like, you're not bringing anything new to the table. Like, you're just trying to do old Top Cat cartoons. But much to my surprise, last year there was a second one that was in 3D.
Yeah, it is funny when you see that. All right, so it's not about cockfighting per se, but cockfighting is heavily implied as being something within the world of the movie. It's about a chicken who fights an evil rancher, I guess, and he gets trained by a cockfighter. So yeah. Yeah, the trailer made it look cool. What's that?
Zach, so I guess that made it.
Oh.
Okay. So, now that we've covered that material, Zach, you saw Tale of Tales. I'm very curious to hear about this movie.
If we're going to be able to
The
get enough of this
movie.
movie.
You hear me? You hear me now?
I heard it's a movie, so you're gonna have to go into more detail.
Clear.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're having some audio issues with you, Zach.
I don't know if this is going to work right now. So for the sake of the recording,
Yeah, I would say, Zach, your audio is off for the time being. We'll try to jump back to you in a little bit. We're gonna move on though really quickly to talk about With Bob and David.
okay, sure.
All right, now With Bob and David is the new television sketch comedy series, which is a spiritual successor to the HBO comedy series from the 90s called Mr. Show with Bob and David. It stars Bob Odenkirk and David Cross, who, of course, you may know David Cross from the Alvin and the Chipmunks movies,
No, don't say that.
or his stand-up comedy. Yeah,
First of all,
hopefully.
If you want to talk David Cross in the mainstream, Men in Black 1 and 2, I think a lot of people remember him from those. And Scary Movie. Arrested Development's a kind of I think it's more popular now, like, because that's the thing is, like, I was into Arrested Development for the whole thing, but it's so mainstream now. Scary Movie 2, a lot of people remember David Cross from. And yeah, Alvin and the Chipmunks. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had to mention Alvin and the Chipmunks just as a joke. With Bob and David is basically much like Mr. Show. It's a series of sketches, many of which are tied together via kind of subtle links that make it flow very much with a stream of consciousness. Now, there's not as much of a heavy need for them to do links in this series. During Mr. Show, they were kind of tied to that conceit much more closely. Admittedly, I would argue that the original HBO series, as a result, has a much more cohesive flow to it, being that. But at the same time, if you really just want to write funny comedic sketches, the problem with tying yourself to that conceit is by your nature, you're limiting yourself to what you can and can't do. And so that's the theory behind this series, is to just open it up and have them, a lot of the original cast, most of them, come together, write new sketches, perform them, and hopefully, they're funny. And I would argue, overall, the series is successful in that regard.
I agree with you. But before we actually talk about With Bob and David, I think it should be noted that Mr. Show was one of the first things you and I bonded over.
Certainly. It's Mr. Show is kind of a rite of passage among fans of comedy, and particularly sketch comedy, because there's only a handful of sketch comedy shows that had that idea of stream of consciousness and really used it. Of course, the original show that really got into it, Monty Python, Monty Python's Flying Circus really did that. There were a couple things like the radio show, The Goon Show, on British radio that did that prior to Monty Python, but Python was the show that really made it famous. Mr. Show, you could, in many ways, say borrows from the Monty Python catalog in that regard, but updated it to the 90s and very much had a alternate comedy sensibility to it, where the sense of humor was kind of about testing the limits of sketch comedy and self-reference. Most famously, there's a sketch on it called the audition sketch.
Right.
And the audition sketch is literally the most self-referential sketch you will see, I think, in anything of sketch comedy, because it is about a person who goes in to do an audition, and the play he decides to read for his audition is called The Audition. in which he berates the people who are auditioning him because they continue to interrupt him.
Every time they interrupt him, he starts over and gets a little bit further, and then adds a little bit more, and gradually it gets more specific to who he's auditioning for.
Sort of, I mentioned offhanded that in the movie in the movie Skyfall, Sam Mendes designed a couple action sequences like a Russian nesting doll. You could say that about that sketch, where the deeper in you get something new each time, and it just goes deeper and deeper until you think you're losing your mind. Another sketch on the original Mr. Show series that did this was the pre-taped call-in show.
Right.
Where the concept of the pre-taped call-in show is they are on, they're like 5th or 6th episode of a show. And because their show is pre-taped, the call-ins are supposed to be calling for questions about next week's episode, because that caller will be talking about the topic of next week's episode, while the episode which is airing is the previous week's episode, and no one understands this for obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And you watch, though, as he just gets more and more angry over time, because you can tell that the conceit of the show itself is inherently just wrong. Now, that's only one example of the kind of humor that the show had. What made Mr. Show also unique was the variety of humor that it offered. There were also music-oriented sketches, like Jeepers Creepers Semi-Star, which was a parody of Jesus Christ Superstar involving the theme of a slacker, played by Jack Black, by the way. And they also had these sketches, which I kind of liked to call the Hoop Dreams sketches, because you had a sketch where these people are kind of they're a startup Make-A-Wish Foundation sort of company, and it's about how completely wrong they have the subject. There's also a sketch that is about very small colleges trying to recruit children to their college via sports, and their colleges are so small that they're resorted to recruiting children from, basically birth.
Just a quick shout-out to Nathan for you. He kind of did this recently with a sporting goods store to, have an athlete endorsement deal for a sport where he was approaching child soccer players' parents about endorsement deals.
Yeah. And that's what's unique about the show, though, is its ability to have variety. It also had some more ridiculous sketches, like a sketch that made fun of Sid and Marty Krofft that was all about drugs. Because
Drugachusetts.
The altered state of Drugachusetts.
Right, I would argue with you that, because I'm a big fan of the original TV show Land of the Lost, it's going after H.R. Puffin stuff specifically.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
They don't really touch on Land of the Lost at all. It's mostly
nor do they touch on Sigmund and the Sea Monsters.
Right. Yeah. It's pretty much just H.R. Puffin stuff. But don't get me wrong, Drugachusetts is like an all-time classic Mr. Show sketch.
And let's be honest, the show is called Drugachusetts, and the theme song for H.R. Puffin stuff, which, by the way, Puffin stuff itself is there, but the theme song is...
H.R. Puffin stuff.
It's can't do a little if you can't do enough. That's how the song goes. It's about drugs. Seriously.
If you want to be out, you got to set around cocaine. I hope we don't get a cease and desist from that.
Oh, with that beautiful rendition? I think they'll send you a check. So, With Bob and David is a 4-episode kind of mini-series that revisits that element. And the humor is very much in that same vein. You can tell that the same minds are behind it. Mm-hmm. I would argue some of the sketches on the show are as good as anything Mr. Show ever did. There are, as with all sketch shows, it's not, there are a few that don't hit quite as hard as maybe they should. But that said, the first season of Mr. Show was only 4 episodes long, and it had some consistency issues too. And it's been years since
well,
they've come
one
together.
thing,
So,
as far as you were talking about things that made Mr. Show unique, and this pretty much you kind of covered this, but at the same time, like, to get specific, the connections of sketch to sketch, and I know, stream of consciousness, that's what that is, but the way that they did it and the way that they continued to do it throughout 4 seasons just escalated and got to a perfect place.
right.
And the new show with Bob and David seems to pick that right up. Like, yeah, like, I feel like it didn't go away. Like, they didn't lose a beat.
Yeah, I would say overall, every episode, I would say, has plenty of things to appreciate in them. And it's one thing to note is I would argue seasons 3 and 4 of Mr. Show are nearly flawless.
Yeah.
And the show didn't get a 5th season, and so this feels like a logical 5th season of the series. Granted, it's, almost 20 years later. But you know what? It's worth the investment of time that it took. And really, I would say the performers, if anything, are more convincing than ever in their roles. My particular favorite of the performers who isn't Bob and David, because of course, they are the primary performers. I would say one of the sketches from the first episode, Paul F. Tompkins plays a character who has been told by his doctor to stop eating so much red meat. And the sketch is all about his friends telling him, you need to pick a realistic New Year's resolution because there's no way you're going to avoid red meat. And the way he plays it, the consternation he has for his asshole friends who are basically telling him to, fuck it, eat red meat because you're not going to get away from that. He becomes so morally opposed to it, and it is within that straight man, like, people say that a straight man performance is, some people take issue with a straight man performance because they say, oh, they're not being funny. That's not true. A good straight man is funny because of his reactions to someone being completely off their rocker. And that would be my highlight. Of non Bob and David performances. That is. Do you have any particular highlights that stuck out for you?
Really quickly, before I get to that, I just want to plug Comedy Bang Bang real quick because the new Comedy Bang Bang this week is half the episode is Bob with Paul F. Tompkins doing a character. And that first half of the episode is just fantastic because before he does the character that's traditionally done in the second half of the interview portion of Comedy Bang Bang, Paul F. Tompkins just comes in and starts talking as himself, and they're just kind of bullshitting about different things. And it's if you're a Mr. Show fan, it's fantastic. And then the second half is David and someone else who I don't think is involved in Mr. Show, and it's still good. I just think it's a little less interesting than the Bob portion, just because Paul F. Tompkins was there and they were talking about Mr. Show stuff. But okay, as far as the newer stuff that really, really sticks out to me, I love the Kitchen Nightmares or whatever sketch, the cooking show sketch with Bob plays this dad who is like in a shitty position, but he's like not in such a shitty position because his opponents are like blind and oppressed.
Right. So I would say the easiest way to sum it up is his character is trying to be cool on television, and he's a father, and he's like, yeah, I showed that fathers can be cool too, as they, when they cook and that sort of thing, and so and the audience seems mildly unimpressed by him, and the next contestant on this show proceeds to tell a sob story about their life, and then the next one tells an even sadder sob story about their life, and then, unlike being humble like most human beings would, he decides, all right, well, I've got a sob story too, and he starts making up shit, and that leads to some pretty hilarious moments, I would say. Excuse me.
You're good.
So Zach appears to have dropped off. So I would say, we will come back to some of those movies that he wanted to talk to some other time. Some of the one thing that's worth noting is the writing credits on this show. It's like a casting call of solid comedians. You have Scott Aukerman, David Cross, Bob Odenkirk, his brother Bill Odenkirk, Brian Posehn, Dino Stamatopoulos, Paul F. Tompkins, Jay Johnston. Just all of those people just have stellar comedy chops, and I was actually kind of surprised at Scott Aukerman with all the shit that he has going on. He managed to be a credited writer for all 4 episodes, so he put his work in on that. And it's worth noting that he plays. And again, what's that?
My connection messed up a little bit, but he talks about this a little bit on the podcast, which is he says he was only there for 7 days.
Mm-hmm.
And for him, that's probably a commitment, just because, like you said, he has a lot of shit that he does.
Yeah. Oh, he's involved. I mean, he's credited as a writer on all 4 episodes. He appears in only like 1 or 2 sketches in 1 episode, but I would say his influence in his writing is certainly felt. And if you've ever seen Comedy Bang Bang the series, you can tell that his humor heavily influenced by Mr. Show, which he did have a couple small roles on. And I believe he was a writer too.
Would you say most famously he's the Taint guy?
Yeah, I would say that would be the most famous, and it's one of the best sketches on the series.
Yeah.
Taint misbehaving.
Oh God, I love that shit. That's the thing, is watching this, there were things, and this is not a complaint. This is, I loved With Bob and David, but it made me yearn for Mr. Show, because there were things that I was like, oh man, I remember this, and it's not a part of this new series. And I was like, damn, I want to go. Like, I'm gonna go revisit Mr. Show at some point. But like, just kind of the recurring elements of Mr. Show, like the fact that every episode would open with, "Hey everyone, it's Bob and David," and then Bob and David would come out. Bob had the suit on. David would have the T-shirt and the shorts, and that whole dynamic of them, and just the stylistic setup, like the aesthetic of Mr. Show I just got super nostalgic for it.
It's clear that this show was done on a very low budget. Here's what's interesting, and it's almost circuitous in that respect, in that the first 2 seasons of Mr. Show with Bob and David were literally shot in a restaurant that had a stage. And
the pilot, David breaks down and points all of that out, and it's a fantastic. Yeah. Like, I think that gets the biggest laugh of anything in the episode.
And they didn't get to shoot on a soundstage until the 3rd and 4th seasons. And on this 5th season, I don't want to call it a final season, which I'm going to call it a 5th season, though, because it is a spiritual continuance, whether they use the name or not.
I'm not going to argue with you on that.
What I will say is that what they do this time is they shoot it on a soundstage, but it's made up to look like a small little club. You know, you have tables and chairs and people sitting, and it's the soundstage is tiny. It's like Bill, it's like the soundstage they have in Red Letter Media. It's about that big. It's a tiny little place, and yet they make it work so well. And the great thing about this show, that very much like Monty Python, is some sketches are done before a live audience, and some are filmed pre-taped sketches, and the pre-taped sketches sort of overlap with them. And it changes up the pacing enough so that over the course of every half-hour episode, you really feel like you're getting served a nice, tasty portion of multiple different types of comedy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we've talked that one out a lot. Needless to say, if you don't have to have seen Mr. Show and with Bob and David to watch this series. I would say it helps, although it intrigues me to think of how people would take it watching these shows and then going back and watching the old seasons. That's
that's what's going to happen when I show my girlfriend this. She's probably going to see the Netflix stuff first. But like, Mr. Show is such a, like, the way some people feel about Kids in the Hall, like people that grew up with that, or Upright Citizens Brigade, or Monty Python. Like that, Mr. Show was that to me, and I didn't watch it when it was airing. Comedy Central would rerun Mr. Show, sometimes censored, but sometimes they would do their secret stash and they would show their movie, and then they would have an uncensored Mr. Show episode afterwards. And that was like one of the first times like I actually took notice, and I was like, oh my God, I need to understand what this is.
My experience with Mr. Show was fascinating in that my folks had HBO back in the day, and while it was on TV, I was probably too young to watch a show like Mr. Show, a very rated R kind of series. The first season that I watched was the fourth season, and I didn't watch the whole season. I just watched a couple episodes. The very first sketch I watched, Bill, and this is for more Mr. Show fans, so we're going to get a little inside baseball here, is the Superstar sketch. Superstar and a superstar machine.
You're a superstar machine, taking it to the stars. Emotion lotion.
Yeah, and that sketch was just so off the wall. My brother and I watched it just in awe. It was like midnight on HBO. Parents were asleep, so we thought we were being dangerous by watching the show. And
I just told a big lie, actually. Not to cut you off, but for me, actually, it would probably be Tim and Eric Awesome Show, because what you're describing is my reaction to Tim and Eric Awesome Show as that was going on, because I was into that at the time. But my bad.
So yeah, so that sketch really baffled me. And the next episode that I watched was from the third season, and it was the episode that had Drukachusis in it. And let me put it this way: I have never done drugs in my life of any illegal sort. Not that I have any moral grounding against it, but I felt at the time, and knowing what I know now, I actually kind of. I felt like this is a show that is this a show you have to be stoned to make, and then over time I started to learn more and more about it, and I'm like, no. The brilliance behind that show, the brilliance behind it, comes from the fact that they made it feel so seamless and so crazy because they have such a strong work ethic as writers. They were willing to go somewhere that that you couldn't go if you were doing something like that.
I think they a combination of them and the state and kids represent where comedy is now. Because like a lot of what sells is,
to some extent,
those guys
like the Ben Stiller show you could almost call like ahead of its time in that respect, because it didn't last, and it was great while it was on, but no one watched it. And now when you revisit it, you're like, wow, that informed a lot of these shows. And in fact, Bob Odenkirk and David Cross were both involved in that project. So,
yeah.
I'm sorry I interrupted. You were saying about the state and such?
Oh, just, like when you look back on that stuff, you see an undeniable influence on what comes out now. Like, especially with the new Mr. Show with Bob and David, and Wet Hot American Summer is now like almost mainstream in how popular it is. It's like I was into this stuff when nobody knew about these guys. And
put your hipster glasses on.
That's the thing, is like it's not that I want to be a hipster, it's just this is what I was into. Like,
yeah, it is it is in fact true that you loved it before everyone knew that was a type of comedy.
These guys are kind of my heroes, and it's great to see people appreciating it now.
So now that we've covered that, we have one last major topic to discuss, and that's our initial thoughts on the first couple episodes of Ash versus the Evil Dead.
Yeah, this was cool.
Now, I've been a fan of the Evil Dead movies for some time, probably since high school is when I was first introduced to the films. I came into it a little later than some people, but I had a couple friends who kind of, they educated me back
I
then.
think that's the thing. You kind of need. Let me rephrase this, because I was going to say you kind of need a way in, but that's not true because, like I said, now it's kind of mainstream and everyone knows about it. But
I had this friend in high school named Kyle who one day he wore this T-shirt to school that he was forced to take off because it was depicting violence. It was a picture of a guy standing there with a chainsaw arm and blood all over the place, and it said "Evil Dead."
right.
And they made him take it off, and when I saw the shirt sitting on his desk, I was like, "What is that? That's kind of cool looking." And he said, "You've never heard of the Evil Dead?" And I said, No, I haven't. And he basically he gave me the nerd shaming look because we had talked movies before. And the nerd shaming look is he looks at you like, "What the fuck? You've talked to me about movies. You don't know what Evil Dead is? Get away from me."
This was the 90s, right?
Yeah, it was the 90s. And so
The 90s was a weird time.
And so what happened was I went to, that weekend, I went to the video store and I rented Evil Dead and The Evil Dead 2. And I watched them and I realized, wow, these are kind of awesome. Another problem I had was I was a late bloomer when it came to watching horror. I was traumatized when I was a very little kid watching mild horror films, probably when I was too young. And so as a result, I kind of stayed away from them for a long time. It took until probably my, I would say, junior year in high school. Maybe my sophomore year before I started watching them in earnest.
Mm-hmm.
And so I missed out on a lot of classic horror films. So with that said, Bill, your sound just cut out, by the way. Just thought I'd throw that out there. So with that said, Ash versus the Evil Dead is much like with Bob and David, it's a spiritual continuance. In this case, it's a continuance of the Evil Dead franchise. The series kind of ignores the events of Army of Darkness, or at least so far it has been. It seems to be kind of a direct sequel to Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn, and stars Bruce Campbell reprising his role as Ash, alongside Jill Marie Jones, Ray Santiago, and Lucy Lawless, who doesn't really appear much, if at all, in the first couple episodes. I see Bill dropped off. He might be coming back in a bit, but I'll go ahead and just summarize it. The show's for the Starz Network, and I had a chance to watch the first 2 episodes, which the first episode was directed by Sam Raimi. The show's kind of developed by Sam Raimi alongside his brother Ivan and a guy named Tom Spezialy. I hope I'm not butchering that as badly as I think I might be. So with that said, the series uses a lot of it basically takes place in a good distance from that movie, and Ash unwittingly brings back the evil that he thought he had abandoned long ago in the woods. And so far, what I like about the show is it very much keeps the spirit of the original series. It has the same sense of humor to it. It carries a lot of the same tropes in terms of the catchphrasing. The music is really fun because it's all like 80s rock and roll, and it really does set the mood of Ash as just this person from another era that's long ago forgotten about him. And it sets it in a modern setting in which his character just has done nothing with his life. He's still living in a trailer park. He's got a dead-end job at a hardware store. And, he finds himself, his calling is fighting the Evil Dead. And really the gore effects are kind of a highlight of the show, I would say, because a lot of it is practical, and there is some CGI, but the CGI is not too terrible. I mean, okay, there's a few moments where the CGI gets pretty weak, but it's a low budget series, and it's done just to kind of bring back um, the nostalgia from that series. I can't say that I can say that I've had a lot of fun watching it. So, Bill. Hi, Bill. You just joined me right as I wrapped up talking about Ash versus the Evil Dead, and I was just about to end the podcast thinking you had disappeared.
Whoa, yeah, I'm still here. My bad.
Yeah, well, you gotta bring in what I was just saying is I rather enjoy the show. Go ahead and tell us what you think of it.
Well, I was really skeptical going in, and I told you, I was like, I don't know if I want to watch this because, I'm just because like Bob and David, it's a reboot, it's a revival, it's let's revisit that thing we did 20 years ago, and
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to that, but I'm just kind of sick of it at this point, and to a detriment to where it's hindering me from, I'm being skeptical about things that I'm gonna like,
Mm-hmm.
and Bob and David and Ash versus Evil Dead are the perfect examples of that because I was kind of skeptical on both of them, and then I sat down and watched them, and I was like, these are fucking great,
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with it. There are a couple elements that I think later episodes hopefully will expand a little bit more on character. I think the half-hour format of the show is interesting because you're watching these segments in very small doses.
Mm-hmm.
I can honestly envision Ash versus the Evil Dead might be one of those shows that's better to watch binged, like watching however many episodes they're going to do, like in one go.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. I mean, that's kind of the problem with non-Netflix television nowadays, is because Netflix is the only platform I think that does that.
Mm-hmm.
So when you because like every TV show nowadays kind of works on this serialized format to where it ends and you're like, I want more and I can't wait. I want it now.
Mm-hmm.
We're too used to instant gratification, I guess.
Yeah, and admittedly, we've been spoiled by Netflix because, I mean, just coming up this Friday on the 20th, we're going to get Jessica Jones dropped in our box. And so we'll get to watch another entire season of Marvel, which I have no doubt I will have that entire season watched by the next Pubcast.
Yeah.
Because it'll be available, and I want to be able to review it. I want to be one of the first to put my opinion out there. I did that for Daredevil.
I'll be looking for those Daredevil connections because I love Daredevil.
Yeah, the great thing about Daredevil was that it's not the kind of show that you would ever have seen on network TV. They took genuine chances with characters, with the way the plot develops, with the amount of violence the show contains. It legitimately would be a rated R movie. And so the only the only channel that could ever show Daredevil would be HBO.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing that's fascinating about it, especially since it's based on pardon me. Especially since it's based on such a big franchise. So with that said, with Ash versus the Evil Dead, what I like about it is it maintains a sense of humor and the mood of the show. I think it still stands to show how the series will develop over the next few episodes. We haven't seen that third episode yet, but I'm sure that'll be next on our list.
Mm-hmm.
And it's worth noting that this is going to be a 10-episode run, and I don't know if it's. Actually, it says here Starz did renew it.
I heard pretty much the night that it aired. Actually, I think before it even aired, that they renewed it for a second season.
Mm-hmm.
I could be wrong, but I believe that they renewed it for a second season before it had even aired on television.
Yeah, and that's something really really intriguing, and I think the fact is that television has become such a massive it's become such a massive niche kind of thing. You can't really have a show that appeals to everyone anymore. It used to be you would have 40 million people watching the same thing. And now you have a couple million people watching this, couple million people watching that. And it's more a matter of what people want to get out of their show.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Ash vs. Evil Dead, if you are a fan of horror comedy, is very worth the watch.
I agree with that completely. But before we close out, speaking on the serialization of television, I want to do a Gravity Falls update. Let me get my hat back on.
Okay.
There we go. Okay.
Update us.
So I think we last left off with you seeing The Inconveniencing. The last time we talked about this, you had watched from the first episode up to the 5th episode. And from there, you've seen episode 6 all the way up to 14. You saw up to Bottomless Pit, right?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. And honestly, like, there are some great episodes in between these two. Specifically, I'll just run over them real quick, which would be like Dipper versus Manliness. What'd you think about that?
That was interesting. It's definitely a bottle episode where it all, none of it really impacts any overall storyline, but it's very funny. The concept of sort of lampooning just the manly man kind of persona, sort of, if you remember the extreme marketing of the 90s, every character in this is sort of taken out of that aspect, and I really enjoyed the way it made fun of that. The Summerween episode was also one that I found kind of fascinating.
That's a good episode. That's a really good like Halloween special, I think. And you're not in season 2 yet, but there's also a Halloween special in season 2. It's very different from Summerween. They're both good, but I think Summerween might just have the edge there because it's just a little more gritty with that the Summerween character.
Okay. Yeah, and the other episode that really appealed to me, I would say, would be the the episode that introduced the pig.
Oh, really? Well, before that, I wanted to ask you how you felt about Fight Fighters, because everybody loves Fight Fighters.
Fight Fighters. Remind me what that one was?
That's the Street Fighter parody.
Oh, yeah, that episode's great. I enjoyed that, for sure.
There's so many references to Street Fighter 2, and I fucking love Street Fighter 2. So, for me, that's just... that's indulgence. Yeah, that's indulgence right there. Because there's a part where the Street Fighter guy is like walking past a car, and then he just beats the shit out of the car. And he just goes on his way, and it's like, what, because that's a Street Fighter bonus round, Okay, so that's that. I think out of all these episodes, the only one that's really kind of story-based, as far as like the main story of the show, is Bottomless Pit. And even then, like, it's not really, because the Bottomless Pit, this is the one episode where it's important. It matters. But they're all good episodes. That's the thing about the show, is like, there are shows like this that have a serialized storyline, and you're really only interested in the episodes that deal with those. Like, I've tried so many times to get into Adventure Time, and I really just can't. Like, the filler is not my thing, and I like the bigger story elements to that show, but I'm not so much digging the filler. And in Gravity Falls, the filler really never bothers me.
Yeah, what I like about Gravity Falls is it keeps things light while hinting at something heavier sort of around the corner. And so far, I haven't seen a major balls drop, so to speak. But you have the feeling that could happen, and I like that.
I think once you get to the end of the first season, you'll pretty much be hooked, because they end it very well, and then the second season starts up strong and kind of that's season 2 is really where the show gets going with the larger story.
Okay. Well, I can't wait to get into that.
Yeah.
So before we go, the last thing I want to talk about is really quick, just do a streaming recommendation. So first of all, Bill, do you have a recommendation on streaming for people to watch?
YouTube video game guys. Cat Icarus, Peanut Butter Gamer, Pro Jared. I'm loving these guys right now. And I've always, specifically Cat Icarus, I've been a fan of for quite some time. Peanut Butter Gamer and Pro Jared, I'm more recently getting into, but I'm loving their stuff. I'm enjoying. And these are old videos, but I'm seeing them for the first time now, and I'm really liking them.
All right. Well, my recommendation is Otto Preminger's Laura, which just added to Netflix. We mentioned this in a previous episode, and I want to just say, if you are looking for classic film noir, Laura is a wonderful example. It stars Gene Tierney and Dana Andrews, as well as Vincent Price. And this is one of the rare non-horror Vincent Price performances, and it's one of his best. In fact, I believe Price thought this was one of his greatest films, and I would agree. The plot of the movie, just to give a brief explanation, is it's about a police detective investigating the murder of a successful female businesswoman, played by Gene Tierney, named Laura Hunt, and she was murdered apparently by shotgun blast to the face. And his investigation becomes more and more kind of creeper-like. He kind of becomes obsessed with this woman who is dead, and just kind of gets wrapped up in it. And he discovers in his investigation a sprawling conspiracy, and there's a lot of plot twists in this that you really don't see coming, that really do make things fascinating. And in keeping with film noir, it's got beautiful cinematography, very dark and gloomy, a lot of shadow play, really fascinating. And the movie has this very sharply written narration that permeates it. This is the kind of movie that, if you know anyone who tells you that they just don't, they just don't get black and white movies, that's someone who's never experienced a truly artful black and white film. This is one of the greatest films of the first half of the 20th century. It was made in 1944, and highly recommended.
Did Otto Preminger direct Double Indemnity? No, he did not. Okay, I was loading the Wikipedia page, and it just came up. Billy Wilder directed Double Indemnity.
Yes, Preminger and Billy Wilder were both very, very accomplished filmmakers in film noir. Some of his other films that you might know as a director, he also did... Well, okay, this one isn't technically film noir, but it's one of my favorites, Stalag 17, which famously was, if you've ever seen Hogan's Heroes was basically meant as a parody of this film. Stalag 17 is a sort of dark satirical war film set in a prisoner of war camp, and it stars William Holden as a prisoner who is accused of being an informant amongst his men, and it's really a fascinating movie. Another movie of Otto Preminger's, Anatomy of a Murder, which, I know, Bill, you'll appreciate this. Anatomy of a Murder, James Stewart. You're a Jimmy Stewart guy. If you are... What's that?
I've told you this. I'm related to Jimmy Stewart distantly. He's like related to my family or some shit. I don't know the specifics of that. He's like my 6th cousin removed or something. I don't know. So, like, it's more like I became a fan of his because I had no choice. Because, like, his movies were forced upon me, and I was like, oh, this guy's actually good. Like, there was there was this point in my life, because this had been shoved down my throat for so long, where it was like, oh, I get it. You know, this is why people make a big deal out of this.
Yeah, well, you know, with that, I mean, I understand, especially with the familial aspect of it, that, you know, there's a lot of connection to that. Anatomy of a Murder, in particular, is a movie. Have you seen it, Bill?
No, I haven't seen that one.
It's from 1959, and it's a particularly dark courtroom drama for its time. First of all, the movie is noteworthy, in particular, for the way it directly addresses some aspects of sexuality, such as rape. The courtroom drama also deals with aspects like semen analysis, which this is in the 50s when something like that comes up. This movie took a lot of chances.
That's unheard of, even by like 60s, 70s standards.
Absolutely. And the plot of the film, first of all, it's set in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and Jimmy Stewart plays a small-town lawyer, kind of down on his luck. He was a former district attorney who lost his re-election, and he spends most of his time kind of drinking and chilling. And one day he gets this case that is thrown on his desk regarding the murder of a innkeeper. And basically what happens, what's fascinating about it, though, is the person he's defending doesn't deny that she killed him. But she, you know, there's an element of, there's an element where her murder might be permissible given certain reasons that she has for it. The attorney who is prosecuting the case is George C. Scott, and it's one of his great performances. If you're at all a fan of George C. Scott's performances in films like Patton, or I'm brain farting all of a sudden, Dr. Strangelove, or anything like that, he really, this is another meaty role. It's a small role, but it's real. He gets into it. And one thing that's kind of fascinating about the movie to a Midwesterner like me is the movie's setting within the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. There's constant references to the name of this inn that's called like the Thunder Bay Inn, which you don't think too much about it, but back then it didn't mean a whole lot. It was just, you know, Thunder Bay was a bay in Lake Superior. Now Thunder Bay is a major city in Canada, and, you know, of over 100,000 people, and the word predates that, and so it's kind of fascinating how, watching it nowadays, if you're someone who lives in the area and is familiar with these names, you think, oh, so what, did they go to Canada all of a sudden? It kind of threw me off at first. But this movie is noteworthy because it was shot almost entirely in Michigan. And in those days, they didn't like shooting films on location. But Otto Preminger was a bit of a stubborn motherfucker. And so
eccentric.
Yes.
An eccentric.
Well, hell, he was Mr. Freeze on the Batman TV series. Yes, he was one of 3 actors to play Mr. Freeze, and that just shows how unusual he was. But another thing that's noteworthy of Anatomy of the Murder and of a Murder, and I'll close up with this: the opening titles were done by Saul Bass, and it's one of the just iconic early Saul Bass opening title sequences. As a fan of animation, Bill, I'm sure you're familiar with Saul Bass and his work in opening titles. No?
No, what's he done?
He did opening title sequences for films like Vertigo, the Alfred Hitchcock movie. The Magnificent Seven, Exodus, It's a Mad, 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 Mad World.
Okay, yeah, I am familiar with his work. I never knew his name. Okay.
Yeah, he designed the poster for The Shining. That's really weird. It doesn't even really tell you much about the story, but Saul Bass was his big gig was he was a graphic designer who designed just these groundbreakingly inventive paper cutout animation sequences for the opening titles of movies. And I mean, it really is hugely fascinating. Nowadays there's a ton of animated sequences that kind of pay tribute to his style, and I think rightly so because of how cool they were.
We're going to go out on TCM. What's on TCM right now? And the answer to that question is Reflections in a Golden Eye from 1967. Directed by John Huston, starring Marlon Brando and Elizabeth Taylor. Have you ever heard of this movie before?
You know what? The name sounds like something I might have heard of, but I can't honestly say. The cast tells me that you said it was 1967?
Yeah, and Wikipedia says in the first paragraph that the film bombed at the box office.
Which would make sense because the late 60s was Marlon Brando's downturn in his career. That was when he was becoming increasingly eccentric. Famously, The Godfather kind of gave him a brief revival to his career, but they didn't want him. Francis Ford Coppola had to fight tooth and nail to get Marlon Brando in The Godfather. Mm-hmm. And it was, it was a huge fight. And actually, to give an idea of his eccentricities, most famously, instead of going to accept the Academy Award for Best Actor himself, he sent a Indian girl to accept it, and she made a statement about the way America has been treating the American Indian. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of the first major incident of a political statement at the Oscars. And like every time someone's tried to make a political statement at the Oscars, it went down not the most positively in the media. People kind of hated him for it.
Here's something really interesting about this film. Reflections of a Golden Eye. Mm-hmm. Still photographs of Brando in character as Major Pendleton were used later by producers of Apocalypse Now. The photos of a younger Brando were displayed in the service record of character Colonel Walter Kurtz.
Oh, absolutely. That makes sense. I remember those pictures. Yeah,
I have the movie on right now. I don't know what the hell is going on. It looks like Exorcist 2. Oh, those are leaves blowing across the ground. Never mind.
Well, John Huston, much like Otto Preminger, was a famously just pig-headed director who got his way whether people liked it or not. And looking at the description of this in Wikipedia, the movie apparently deals with elements of repressed sexuality, voyeurism, homosexuality, and murder. And yeah, Huston was the kind of director who inserted dark shit into very popular movies. Now, Huston also did The African Queen, The Maltese Falcon, The Treasure of Sierra Madre, The Man and the King.
He made these studios a lot of money, so they didn't want to push him the wrong direction.
And in fact, actually, Bill, I will end the podcast on this, just to give one more recommendation. If you've not seen The African Queen, I'm actually not recommending that film, even though it's a great movie and I do recommend it. Right. Clint Eastwood directed a film in the late 80s, early 90s, I think like 1989 or something, that is a fictionalized version of the making of The African Queen, or at least the precursor to the making of it. The movie is called White Hunter, Black Heart.
There's a young Robert Forster in this Reflections of the Golden Eye.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, but, what the fuck?
Now,
my bad. Yeah,
now, White Hunter, Black Heart is directed and starring Clint Eastwood. His character is not named John Huston, but it's basically John Huston. And the movie that they're shooting in the film is basically The African Queen, even though they give it another name. And they rename every actor, even though the movie is basically a satirical following of this character, and is apparently very close to the way John Huston was on the set. Famously, The African Queen was shot entirely in Africa, and he insisted on that. Mm-hmm. And he insisted on it because he wanted to shoot an elephant. He wanted to go elephant hunting, and the shooting schedule for The African Queen was often interrupted and delayed for long periods of time while he would go out hunting. He wanted the studios to fund his elephant hunt, and this movie, White Hunter, Black Heart, kind of covers that. And what's fascinating about the movie, and honestly, it is probably it's in my top 3 favorite Clint Eastwood directed features. It's, I think, a wonderfully fascinating, bizarre movie about just a pig-headed asshole of a director who got what he wanted every time. And this movie is about that character kind of for the first time realizing the gravity of the decisions that he makes.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a chance to see it, first of all, it's one of Clint Eastwood's best performances. It's a beautifully shot movie, and it really is. It hits home. It's got some satirical moments to keep things from becoming too dark, but the ending is just the most. It's a punch to the gut, and it's the kind that is just so memorable. So anyway, that would be my final recommendation of the night. And on that note, I'll go ahead and close things up. Close up the podcast bag for the week, and next week we'll be debating the merits of Jennifer Lawrence's performance in The Hunger Games, Mockingjay Part 2, Electric Boogaloo.
Is that it? That's the big release of next week?
That's the big release. There's also that comedy that Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg have that's like Christmas related.
Oh, I want to see that. I think that looks charming, but
It might be.
That's just me. I like JGL. I like Anthony Mackie. I like Seth Rogen. So, like, I have an interest in seeing that, but whether I actually put forth the effort of seeing it is another story.
And to be perfectly honest, I'm at the end of my rope with Seth Rogen, Evan Goldberg films.
Really?
I might watch this film, but depending on how it goes, this might be my last shot I give them.
Have you heard about Sausage Party?
Not sure I want to.
They're writing an animated film.
Okay.
It's in production. I guess it's going to be done soon. Adult animated 3D animation movie called Sausage Party. And yeah, it sounds bad, but we'll see. We'll see what happens with it. I don't know. The
problem I have with their films is Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg films feel still like movie. There's still the Arrested Development nature of it, of his character just still being a man-child the older he gets and never growing up. And it's the same beats in all of these movies. And I'm tired of it.
I think I have more tolerance for it just because when I think about Seth Rogen, I think about movies that he didn't write, which would be specifically Knocked Up and Observe and Report.
Yeah, and it's just a matter of, I think, my specificity of it. I wasn't a fan of Neighbors. I was not a fan of the North Korea movie. I don't even remember the name of it anymore.
The Interview.
The Interview, that's right.
Yeah, and you were not a big fan of This Is the End either.
Yeah, This Is the End.
That might be the best of the 3 that you just named.
It might be. Well, mostly because he's not in it as much, because there's a lot of other characters in it.
I like that meta shit, and I think there's some really good gags in that movie, but most of them exist within the first 2 acts.
Yeah.
The third act, and specifically the ending, kind of...
That last sequence with them dancing to NSYNC is...
I don't mind that. No, it was the Backstreet Boys, for the record.
I don't give a fuck.
That
music sucks,
that doesn't bother me.
There's no reason to bring it back. There is no reason to bring back that music.
That was more enjoyable than them ascending into heaven and them being like, we're going to heaven? Yeah, we're going to heaven!
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, this is dumb. This isn't clever.
I did like the joke of the one guy who was going to heaven, but then he said a few asshole-ish things, and then he wasn't.
Was that James Franco?
I think something like that. No, it was the one who got killed doing it. He got devoured by a demon monster or something. I forget.
Okay.
Either way, that was interesting, and the animation of the giant Satan marching on Earth with a huge swinging cock knocking buildings over, that was it was childish, but it was kind of funny. That said, I mean, I don't have much else to say about those movies. They're instantly forgettable to me, other than maybe a scene or two. So with that said, we will see you next week. Have a good one.